Unaware I owned a $17 billion company, my wife handed me divorce papers on my birthday. The waiter set the birthday cake in front of me with an awkward smile. A single candle flickered between us. The restaurant fell strangely quiet, as if everyone had sensed something was about to happen. I smiled at my wife. "Make a wish," I whispered. Emily didn't even look at the cake. Instead, she reached into her designer handbag and placed a thick envelope beside my plate. The sound of paper sliding across polished wood was somehow louder than the birthday song, still playing softly through the restaurant speakers. I already made mine. I frowned. "What is this?" "Open it." There wasn't a trace of warmth in her voice. Only exhaustion. No, not exhaustion. Disgust. I tore open the envelope, expecting perhaps concert tickets, maybe a surprise vacation. Instead, the words stared back at me in bold black letters. Petition for dissolution of marriage. For a second, nothing around me existed. The candles, the wine, the people, even my own heartbeat. Everything disappeared into silence. Emily folded her arms. "You've always been slow," she said. "I figured lawyers could explain it better than I can." The couple at the next table glanced toward us before quickly pretending not to listen. Across the room, a few diners had already stopped eating. Public humiliation had become tonight's entertainment. "My birthday?" I finally asked. She shrugged. "I wanted you to remember the date." I looked down at the papers again. 3 years of marriage. 7 years together. Reduced to 37 pages of legal language. I thought we were happy. She laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to make my chest tighten. "You were happy. I was surviving." The waiter awkwardly approached. "Excuse me. Would you like me to?" Emily interrupted. "Take the cake away." Then she looked at me. "He doesn't deserve to celebrate." The young waiter hesitated before carefully lifting the untouched cake. The tiny candle was still burning as it disappeared into the kitchen. Something about watching that little flame leave hurt more than the divorce papers themselves. Emily leaned closer. "I spent the best years of my life waiting for you. I believed every promise. Things will get better. Next year will be different. Just trust me." She shook her head. "You know what changed?" "Nothing. I worked as a logistics coordinator for a small manufacturing company. My salary paid the rent. Barely. We drove a 12-year-old Honda. We lived in a modest apartment with peeling paint near the freeway. Every month ended the same way. Calculators. Bills. Promises. Emily had once believed in those promises. Until social media convinced her everyone else our age was already living better lives. Luxury vacations. New houses. Designer handbags. Weekend yachts. Every swipe of her phone widened the distance between us. "I can't keep pretending," she said quietly. "I want a husband who's going somewhere. I am going somewhere." She smiled with heartbreaking pity. "Daniel, no. You're standing still." I wanted to argue. To explain. To remind her of the nights I stayed awake helping her finish graduate school assignments. The promotions I'd turned down because they required moving away from her family. The dreams I'd quietly postponed so hers could happen first. But somehow, none of that mattered anymore. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down, then smiled. A different smile. Bright. Natural. Alive. She stood. "He's here." My stomach tightened. "Who?" She looked toward the restaurant entrance. "You'll see." A tall man in an expensive navy suit walked inside. Confident. Perfect haircut. Luxury watch. Everything about him screamed success. He walked directly toward our table. Emily slipped her hand into his before he even spoke. "This is Victor." Victor extended his hand toward me. "I'm sorry things had to happen like this." I didn't shake it. Emily sighed dramatically. "See, this is why. You don't even know how to behave." Victor calmly withdrew his hand. "No hard feelings." Emily picked up her coat. "The apartment lease ends next month. My lawyer already handled everything. You can keep the Honda. I don't want memories that smell like failure." They turned toward the exit together. Halfway there, Emily stopped. She looked back one final time. "You know what the saddest part is? I don't hate you. I just can't respect you anymore." Then she disappeared into the rain. The restaurant slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Silverware clinked. Laughter returned. As if my marriage had simply been another course on the menu. The waitress quietly placed the bill on my table. I'm sorry." I forced a smile. "It's okay." She hesitated before reaching into her apron. There was supposed to be a birthday card. I found it under the envelope. She handed me a small blue card Emily had apparently forgotten to throw away. Inside, in handwriting I recognized instantly, were only 4 words. Happy birthday, Daniel. Nothing else. No love. No heart. Maybe she had written it weeks ago. Maybe she'd forgotten to buy another card after deciding to leave. Or maybe those words were the last small kindness she couldn't quite erase. I folded the card carefully and slipped it into my wallet. It would stay there much longer than it should have. Outside, rain soaked the empty parking lot. I walked to my old Honda. The driver's door groaned as usual. The engine needed 2 tries before finally starting. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I ignored it. It rang again. Unknown number. Again. Then again. 5 missed calls within 3 minutes. I finally answered. This is Daniel. A calm, elderly voice spoke. Mr. Carter? Yes. My name is Harold Whitmore. I'm chairman of Whitmore Capital Trustees. I frowned. I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. I'm afraid I don't. There is an urgent matter regarding the Sterling Global Family Trust. I don't know what that is. A pause. Then words that made absolutely no sense. Mr. Carter, we've been searching for you for nearly 6 months. You're the majority owner of Sterling Global Holdings. I laughed bitterly. I think someone is playing a joke. The old man didn't laugh. The company is currently valued at approximately. He paused briefly, as though the number itself carried weight. $17.3 billion. Rain hammered against the windshield. Traffic lights reflected red across the wet glass. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I quietly said the only thing my exhausted mind could process. I think you've called the wrong Daniel. The old man's reply was calm. No, sir. We finally found the right one. And without realizing it, the worst birthday of my life had just become the beginning of a story no one, not even I, could have imagined. Harold waited. He didn't repeat himself. He didn't try to convince me. The silence on the other end of the line somehow made his unbelievable words sound even more real. Finally, I managed to speak. I think, whoever you're looking for, it isn't me. Are you Daniel James Carter? Yes. Born on April 17th? Yes. Adopted at the age of 6? A chill crawled slowly up my spine. Very few people knew that. I've never told anyone that. You wouldn't have. His voice softened. Your adoptive parents honored your biological father's wishes. My grip tightened around the steering wheel. My biological father died before I could remember him. That is what you were told. The rain outside seemed to grow louder. Harold continued carefully. Your father did die. But before he did, he established a trust. A trust designed to remain hidden until specific legal conditions were satisfied. I don't understand. I know. Which is why we'd like to meet you. I'm not interested. Before he could answer, I ended the call. The phone immediately rang again. This time, I turned it off. I leaned back in the driver's seat. The windshield fogged from my breathing. $17 billion. It was absurd. Scammers invented stories like this every day. Some promised lottery winnings. Others claimed forgotten inheritances. This was simply a richer version of the same lie. I drove home, or what was still technically home. The apartment felt strangely empty, even though Emily hadn't taken much. A few dresses, her laptop, some framed photographs. The bookshelf she'd insisted we buy together now had rectangular patches of dust where her favorite novels had once stood. Only the wedding picture remained, mostly because she'd forgotten it. I picked it up. We looked impossibly young. She was laughing, not posing, actually laughing. That smile had once been for me. I set the frame face down. The silence inside the apartment was overwhelming. No television, no music, no footsteps, only the steady humming of the refrigerator. My phone remained powered off all night. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds and landed on unopened divorce papers spread across the kitchen table. I made coffee. Black. No sugar. Emily used to tease me about it. You drink coffee like punishment. Maybe she had been right. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. 3 firm knocks. Not impatient. Professional. I opened it cautiously. 2 men stood outside. Both wore dark suits. One appeared to be in his 70s. Silver hair. Immaculate posture. Kind eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. The other was younger. Perhaps 40. Holding a leather briefcase. Mr. Carter? I sighed. If this is about Sterling whatever. It is. I told you yesterday. Harold smiled gently. We thought meeting face-to-face might be easier. I'm not signing anything. We're not asking you to. He handed me a simple business card. No flashy logo. Just embossed lettering. Harold Whitmore, Chairman Whitmore Capital Trustees. We'll leave if you ask. But before we do, he nodded toward the younger man. The briefcase clicked open. Inside were several thick folders. Photographs. Old documents. Birth certificates. Letters. The younger man carefully removed one faded photograph. A man in his early 30s stood beside a construction site. He wore rolled-up sleeves. Dust covered his boots. Balanced on his shoulders was a laughing little boy no older than 3. The boy was me. I stared silently. I've never seen this picture. No, Harold replied softly. You weren't meant to. He placed another document on the table. A hospital record. Then another. Adoption paperwork. Then a newspaper clipping from 28 years earlier. Industrial entrepreneur Jonathan Carter dies in helicopter accident. Below the headline was the same man from the photograph. My father. Not my adoptive father. My biological father. I felt my knees weaken. Harold spoke slowly. Jonathan Carter founded Sterling Industrial Systems. It later became Sterling Global. He feared that powerful investors would attempt to control the company if anything happened to him. So he created a trust. The majority ownership was transferred to a single beneficiary. I looked at him. Me? Yes. But because you were only 6 years old after the accident, the trust required absolute secrecy. The board could manage the company. The trustees could protect your interests. But ownership could never legally transfer. I laughed nervously. Then why didn't anyone tell me? Because your father's final instruction was very specific. Harold opened another folder. Inside was a handwritten letter. The ink had faded with age. The signature at the bottom read, Jonathan Carter. Harold didn't touch it. He simply let me read. If my son grows believing wealth defines his worth, I have already failed him. Let him become an honest man before he becomes a wealthy one. Only when he reaches 35 years of age, or if extraordinary legal circumstances require it, may he learn the truth. My birthday. Yesterday. 35. Everything suddenly aligned. The date. The repeated phone calls. The urgency. My hands trembled. So yesterday. Harold nodded. The trust matured at midnight. And then, he hesitated. We learned your marital status had changed. I frowned. What does that have to do with anything? The divorce filing triggered several legal disclosures. The board could no longer conceal the ownership structure. They were required to notify you immediately. I stared at him. So, yesterday morning I was the legal owner of Sterling Global. Yes. And last night my wife divorced me because she believed I was a failure. Neither man answered. They didn't have to. The irony hung heavily in the room. Harold reached into his jacket. There is one final item. He placed a black envelope on the table. Inside was a heavy titanium access card engraved with only 2 words. Owner access, tomorrow morning, Harold said quietly. The board of directors will hold an emergency meeting. They've waited 29 years to meet the man they've technically worked for. I looked around my tiny apartment. Peeling wallpaper. Secondhand. Furniture. An aging refrigerator that buzzed louder than it cooled. Then back at the titanium card. I don't even own a proper suit. For the first time since arriving. Harold smiled. A man doesn't inherit $17 billion because of his suit. He inherits it because someone believed his character would survive without it. For the first time since Emily walked away, I didn't think about winning her back. I thought about one question. Who had I really been all these years? If the entire world had mistaken the owner for an ordinary employee, including me. The next morning, I stood in front of the only mirror in my apartment. The same charcoal gray suit I'd worn to job interviews hung loosely on my shoulders. It was nearly 8 years old. The cuffs were slightly frayed. One button had been replaced with a different shade after the original fell off. I almost laughed. Yesterday, my wife had left me because she believed I would never become successful. Today, according to a group of strangers, I was expected to walk into a boardroom as the owner of a $17 billion company. Nothing about that felt real. A black sedan waited outside exactly at 8. Not a limousine. Not a flashy luxury car. Just an understated executive vehicle. Harold stepped out before I reached the sidewalk. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Daniel is fine. He smiled. I suspect that will change after today. As the car pulled away, I watched my apartment building disappear through the rear window. Laundry fluttered from balconies. Children chased each other through the parking lot. An elderly man watered flowers outside his door. It was the life I had always known. Simple, ordinary, real. Harold seemed to notice where I was looking. You don't have to leave it behind. I don't know if I belong in the other world. You don't. I turned toward him. You'll create your own. 40 minutes later, the skyline changed. Steel towers reflected the morning sun. Glass buildings reached into the clouds. At the center of the financial district stood a tower unlike the others. Elegant, minimal. Its silver exterior caught the light without demanding attention. Across the entrance were 3 words. Sterling Global. My chest tightened. Employees streamed through revolving doors carrying coffee cups and laptops. None of them spared me a second glance. To them, I was just another visitor. Harold handed me the titanium access card. The doors recognize ownership credentials. I've never even used an access card before. Neither had your father. What? He carried blueprints in his pockets. He said buildings mattered less than people inside them. For the first time, I smiled. Maybe I had inherited more than shares. The lobby was breathtaking. Marble floors. Living walls filled with greenery. Sunlight poured through a glass ceiling nearly 30 stories above. Everything felt impossibly quiet. No shouting. No rushing. Only calm efficiency. A receptionist looked up politely. Good morning. Before Harold could speak, I instinctively reached into my wallet. I think I'm supposed to sign in. Harold gently touched my arm. No. He nodded toward the access gate. I hesitated, then slid the titanium card across the scanner. For half a second, nothing happened. Then every security gate unlocked simultaneously. Soft lights turned from blue to gold. The receptionist's eyes widened. Several nearby employees stopped walking. A quiet chime echoed through the enormous lobby. Owner access verified. Silence. Complete silence. The receptionist immediately stood. So it's true. Her voice trembled. You've finally come. Within seconds, security officers, managers, and assistants were standing respectfully. Not because they recognized me, because the building recognized me. And apparently, that was enough. The executive elevator required another scan. This time, it skipped every floor automatically. 38, 42, 50, 58. The doors opened into a private reception area. A pair of enormous wooden doors stood ahead. Beyond them, voices, arguments. Someone slammed a folder onto a table. Another voice snapped back. They'll never agree. We don't have a choice. Harold quietly opened one door. The room fell silent. 22 people sat around an enormous walnut conference table. Gray hair, tailored suits, decades of experience. The kind of people newspapers called financial legends. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. I immediately wanted to leave. The chairman stood first, then another director, then another. Within seconds, every single person in the room was standing. No applause, no dramatic music, just respectful silence. The chairman walked around the table. He stopped barely 2 feet away. His eyes shimmered. I've waited 29 years to say this. He extended both hands. Welcome home, Mr. Carter. No one sat until I did. That somehow made everything even more uncomfortable. A leather folder rested in front of my chair. Inside were reports, financial statements, investment portfolios, acquisition proposals, numbers so large they barely seemed connected to reality. The chairman noticed my expression. You don't need to understand all of this today. I barely understand any of it. Several directors smiled. One elderly woman adjusted her glasses. Your father used to say exactly the same thing. You knew him? She nodded. He interviewed me himself. I was 26. He asked one question. What was it? Can you admit when you're wrong? I couldn't help smiling. That's an unusual interview. He hired people for humility. Skills can be learned. Character rarely can. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. I learned things that felt impossible. Sterling Global no longer manufactured industrial equipment alone. Over 3 decades, it had expanded into renewable energy, aerospace components, logistics, medical technology, and artificial intelligence. Operations in 42 countries. Nearly 80,000 employees. Annual revenue larger than the economy of some nations. And through an intricate trust my father had established, 53% belonged to me. Not because I had earned it, because he had believed one day I would. That realization weighed heavier than the money itself. Near the end of the meeting, a younger executive entered carrying another folder. "Excuse me, Chairman. The Apex Technologies acquisition team has arrived." The room grew noticeably quieter. One director looked toward me. "Mr. Carter, this will likely interest you." I frowned. "What is Apex Technologies?" The chairman exchanged a glance with Harold, then answered carefully. "It's the company we're negotiating to acquire this afternoon." He slid a file across the table. I opened it absent-mindedly. The company logo appeared first, then photographs of senior management, department heads, regional directors. My breath caught. There, smiling confidently in a corporate portrait, was Emily. Her name appeared beneath the photograph. Emily Carter, Senior Marketing Director. The room blurred for a moment. The chairman looked at me with concern. "Do you know her?" I closed the folder slowly. Without taking my eyes off the photograph, I answered in a calm voice that surprised even me. "Yes." A long pause followed. Then I looked up. "She's my wife." Another silence settled over the boardroom. Finally, I corrected myself. "My ex-wife." No one spoke. The chairman quietly closed the folder. "Would you like us to postpone the acquisition meeting?" I thought about the divorce papers. The birthday cake carried away untouched. The words she'd spoken. "I can't respect you anymore." For the first time since she walked away, I realized I didn't feel anger, only distance. I gently pushed the folder back across the table. "No. Business shouldn't wait because of my personal life." The chairman studied me for several seconds. Then, slowly, he smiled, exactly the way Harold had, as if they had just discovered something far more valuable than $17 billion. The acquisition meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. Until then, the board moved on to routine business, but I barely heard a word. The folder containing Emily's profile remained closed beside me. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. I already knew the woman behind the smiling corporate photograph. Or at least, I thought I did. Just before lunch, Harold approached quietly. "I've arranged a private office for you." "I don't need one. You own the building." He smiled. "I think you're allowed." He led me down a quiet hallway lined with black and white photographs documenting Sterling Global's history. Factories, engineers, scientists, construction crews. Every image focused on people, not buildings. Halfway down the corridor, I stopped. A familiar face stared back at me from one of the oldest photographs. My father, Jonathan Carter. He stood beside dozens of factory workers, all wearing identical uniforms. Except his suit jacket was hanging over one shoulder, and his sleeves were rolled to his elbows. He looked less like a billionaire and more like the hardest-working employee in the picture. A bronze plaque beneath the photograph read, "A leader should never ask someone else to carry a weight he refuses to lift himself." Jonathan Carter. Harold noticed me reading it. That quote became company policy. He really believed that? Every word. He chuckled softly. One winter, a blizzard stranded night shift workers inside one of the factories. "What happened?" "Your father slept there for 3 nights." "In the factory?" "On the concrete floor. He refused to leave until every employee got home safely." I stared at the photograph a little longer. Maybe wealth wasn't what had built Sterling. Maybe character had. My office overlooked nearly the entire city. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Simple furniture. No gold. No unnecessary luxury. The desk was surprisingly modest. On it sat a single wooden box. Harold placed it in front of me. "Your father left this for you." My heartbeat quickened. I thought the letter was everything. "No. This remained sealed. For 29 years. He quietly left the room. I opened the lid. Inside lay an old leather notebook, a fountain pen, and another handwritten envelope. Across the front were 4 words. "For Daniel." When ready, my hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. "My son, if you're reading this, then life has already taught you lessons I never could. If you discovered this letter while still believing money solves loneliness, close it now. Come back later." I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like someone who understood life. I kept reading. "The world will tell you that owning a company makes you important. It doesn't. The janitor locking the doors after everyone leaves may be just as important. Never confuse ownership with value. You may own Sterling, but you must earn the trust of the people inside it." My eyes blurred. If they fear you, you've failed. If they admire your wealth, you've failed. If one day they believe you genuinely care whether their children have food on the table, then perhaps you'll become the kind of man I hoped you'd be. There was one final paragraph, one that hit harder than everything else. One more thing. Never chase anyone who only notices your value after learning your price. People who love your money will always leave when someone richer arrives. People who love your character remain even when you have nothing. I slowly folded the letter. Emily's face appeared in my mind, then disappeared just as quickly. For the first time, I understood what my father had been trying to protect. Not my fortune, me. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. The chairman entered. Sorry to disturb you. It's all right. The Apex delegation has arrived. I glanced at the clock. 2 o'clock exactly. So soon. He nodded. They're waiting in Conference Hall 1. He hesitated. There is something else. What is it? Apex Technologies doesn't know you're attending. I assumed they would. We intentionally kept your identity confidential. Why? The chairman smiled. Because we wanted them to negotiate with Sterling, not with its owner. And because... He paused. We wanted your first impression to be honest. Conference Hall 1 occupied nearly an entire floor. As we approached, voices drifted through the partially opened doors. Someone laughed. Someone else spoke confidently about market projections. The chairman leaned closer. The meeting will begin with introductions. You don't have to speak immediately. I wasn't planning to. He gave a reassuring nod, then pushed open the doors. Around 20 executives from Apex Technologies stood chatting near a long presentation screen. Expensive suits, confident smiles, perfectly rehearsed professionalism. And then, I saw her, Emily. She wore an elegant cream-colored business suit. Her hair was tied neatly behind her shoulders. She looked exactly like the ambitious woman I'd watched become increasingly distant over the last 3 years. She hadn't noticed me yet. She was speaking with Victor, my replacement. Apparently, he'd been promoted quickly. They both laughed at something. Victor rested his hand lightly against the small of her back. The gesture was subtle, familiar, comfortable. Something inside me expected pain. Instead, I felt nothing. Not hatred, not jealousy, only acceptance. The chairman began introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sterling Global. Conversations quieted immediately. Executives took their seats. Emily finally looked toward the entrance. Her eyes landed on me. For one brief second, confusion, then disbelief, then something close to amusement. She leaned toward Victor. He glanced over. A faint smirk crossed his face. I could almost hear what he was thinking. What's he doing here? Emily raised an eyebrow, as if silently asking the same question. One of Apex's vice presidents frowned openly. I'm sorry. He looked toward me. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. He turned politely toward the chairman. I think one of your administrative staff may have entered the wrong room. Several people chuckled politely. Emily lowered her eyes. Embarrassed. Not for me. For Sterling. As though my presence somehow lowered the standard of the meeting. Before anyone could answer, Victor spoke. I know him. The room became quiet. He smiled confidently. Daniel, I didn't know you worked here. A few executives looked between us curiously. Emily gave an awkward laugh. He doesn't. Victor nodded. My mistake. He looked toward the chairman. We were just surprised. Emily finally spoke. Daniel, I really don't think this is the place for personal visits. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. Patient. Like someone explaining reality to a child. If you came because of yesterday. She sighed gently. We can talk later. The room watched silently. No one from Sterling interrupted. Not yet. The chairman simply observed. His expression impossible to read. Emily smiled politely. Someone from reception can help you find the exit. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Not with anger. Not with heartbreak. Just curiosity. How could someone stand so close to the truth and still be unable to see it? I was about to answer when every executive from Sterling Global, including the chairman, rose to their feet at exactly the same moment. Every chair scraped softly against the polished floor. One after another, the executives of Sterling Global stood. Not because someone had entered. Not because a government official had arrived. Because I had. The room fell into complete silence. Emily's polite smile froze. Victor frowned. The Apex delegation exchanged confused glances. The chairman walked around the table with slow, measured steps. He stopped beside me, then turned to face everyone. His voice carried effortlessly across the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. It appears we neglected the most important introduction. He looked at me, There was genuine pride in his eyes. Please allow me. He extended one hand, not for a handshake, but as if presenting someone whose arrival had been anticipated for decades. It is my privilege to introduce the founder family's sole heir, the majority shareholder of Sterling Global Holdings, Mr. Daniel Carter. No one moved. No one breathed. Emily blinked once, then again, as if her mind had rejected what her ears had heard. Victor gave a nervous laugh. I'm sorry. There must be some misunderstanding. The chairman turned toward him calmly. There is none. He gestured toward Harold. Harold placed a leather portfolio on the conference table. Inside were certified ownership documents, the company's seal, board resolutions, trust confirmations, every signature, every legal certification. Every page confirmed the same impossible truth. Daniel Carter, 53% ownership, controlling shareholder. The Apex executives leaned forward almost simultaneously. One of their lawyers adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the documents. His expression changed with every page. Finally, he quietly closed the folder. It's authentic. No one said another word. Emily stared at me, not blinking, not speaking, just staring, as though she were waiting for someone to laugh and admit this had all been a joke. No one did. The chairman continued. For 29 years, Sterling Global has been managed under the Carter Family Trust. The trust matured yesterday. Our owner officially assumed control this morning. He smiled slightly. We've simply been waiting to welcome him. The room remained perfectly still. Emily slowly turned toward Victor. What? She whispered. Is happening? Victor didn't answer. He couldn't. His confident smile had disappeared. For the first time since I'd met him. He looked uncertain. The chairman motioned toward the head of the conference table. Mr. Carter, your seat. I instinctively looked around. Surely he meant someone else. He noticed. It has always been yours. The chair at the end of the table had remained empty throughout the meeting. No nameplate. No documents. Just an empty seat. Waiting. I walked toward it. Each step echoed softly across the room. No dramatic music. No triumphant grin. Only quiet footsteps. When I sat down, everyone else sat with me. Even that small gesture sent another wave of disbelief through the Apex delegation. Emily's hands trembled almost imperceptibly beneath the table. The chairman opened the meeting. As previously scheduled, we'll now discuss Sterling Global's proposed acquisition of Apex Technologies. He turned toward me. As controlling shareholder, the final approval belongs to you. Every eye in the room shifted toward me. Not because of the money. Because one sentence from me could determine the future of thousands of employees. That realization felt infinitely heavier than $17 billion. I took a slow breath. I have one request before we begin. The chairman nodded immediately. Of course. I'd like everyone to speak honestly. No performances. No sales pitches. If this acquisition makes sense, we'll proceed. If it doesn't, we won't. Silence. Then one of Sterling's directors smiled. Exactly what your father would have said. The presentations began. Charts, revenue forecasts, growth projections, risk assessments. For nearly an hour, I listened without interruption. I asked questions when I didn't understand something. Sometimes very basic questions. No one laughed. Instead, the analysts explained patiently. By the end of the presentation, a surprising pattern emerged. Apex wasn't failing because its products were bad. Its leadership had become obsessed with quarterly profits. Research budgets had been cut. Engineers were leaving. Employee satisfaction had collapsed. Margins looked healthier. The company itself did not. It reminded me of something. A marriage. On paper, everything could appear stable. Until one day, it wasn't. Finally, Emily stood to deliver the marketing strategy. She walked confidently to the front. For the first few slides, her voice remained steady. Professional. Polished. Then, she looked up. Our eyes met. For just a fraction of a second. She lost her place. The room waited. She glanced back at the screen. I'm sorry. She found her notes again. Continued. But her confidence was gone. Every few moments, her eyes drifted toward me. Searching. Trying to reconcile the man she divorced yesterday with the man every billionaire in the room now addressed as Mr. Carter. When the presentation ended, the chairman looked toward me. Questions. I closed my notebook. I have one. Emily nodded automatically. Of course. I spoke calmly. Your proposal recommends reducing customer support staff by 12%. Why? She answered almost immediately. To improve operational efficiency. Based on what evidence? Our financial modeling. What happens to response times? She hesitated. They'll increase slightly. Customer satisfaction? Another pause. It may decline temporarily. So you're asking us to buy a company whose strategy for growth begins by serving customers less effectively. The room became very quiet. Emily looked down at her notes. The answer wasn't there. I wasn't trying to embarrass her. I genuinely wanted to understand. After several seconds, she quietly admitted, "We believe the savings justified the trade-off." I nodded once, then wrote something in my notebook. No criticism, no lecture, just one sentence. Never sacrifice people for numbers. My father's words, not mine. The meeting adjourned shortly afterward. The Apex delegation gathered their documents in uneasy silence. As people began leaving the room, I remained seated, speaking quietly with Harold and the chairman. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Emily lingering near the doorway. Victor whispered something to her. She barely seemed to hear him. Finally, she walked toward me alone. She stopped a few feet away. For the first time in years, she looked uncertain. "Daniel." Her voice was barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard. "I don't understand." I looked at her calmly. "There wasn't anything to understand yesterday." "There wasn't. You believed I had no future." She lowered her eyes. "I didn't know." "I know." A painful silence stretched between us. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her since the chairman's introduction. "Why didn't you tell me?" I held her gaze. Because the truth was almost unbelievable. I couldn't. She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I found out yesterday. The same day you handed me the divorce papers." Color drained from her face. She searched my expression for any sign of deception. There was none. Tears slowly gathered in her eyes. "You mean?" I nodded once. "When you left, I still believed I was just an ordinary man." The words hit her harder than any accusation ever could. She took one slow step backward, then another, as realization finally settled over her. She understood something infinitely more devastating than losing $17 billion. She hadn't walked away from a poor husband. She had walked away from the exact same man she once claimed to love. Emily stood frozen. People flowed around us, quietly leaving the conference room, but neither of us moved. For several long seconds, she simply stared at me. Then, in a voice so faint I almost didn't hear it, she asked, "So, yesterday, when I gave you the divorce papers, you truly didn't know?" I shook my head. "I thought I was celebrating my 35th birthday. I thought I was going back to work on Monday. I thought I'd spend the next 10 years trying to earn enough money so we could finally buy a house." A tear escaped before she could wipe it away. I don't know what to say." I offered a small, tired smile. "You don't have to say anything." Because for the first time, there was nothing left to argue about. That evening, the acquisition committee gathered in my office. The chairman placed a final recommendation on my desk. "We're prepared to proceed with the purchase." He paused. "However, the executive committee believes there may be a conflict of interest." I looked up. "Because of Emily?" He nodded. "If you'd rather withdraw from the decision, no one would question it." I thought for a moment, then slowly closed the folder. My father built this company to protect people, not to settle personal scores. The chairman smiled. "I hoped you'd say that. I have one condition. Anything. If we acquire Apex, no employee loses their job simply because spreadsheets say they should." One director frowned. "That will reduce first-year profit." "I know." Another director added. "Shareholders may object." I couldn't help smiling. I'm the majority shareholder. A quiet ripple of laughter spread around the room. It was the first genuine laugh I'd heard all day. Then I continued. "If engineers have ideas, we invest in them. If customer service is understaffed, we hire. If managers are afraid of losing bonuses because they care about employees, they're working at the wrong company." The room fell silent again. Not awkward silence. Respectful silence. Finally, the elderly woman who had known my father spoke. "You sound exactly like him." I looked down at the notebook in front of me. The sentence I had written earlier stared back at me. Never sacrifice people for numbers. Maybe I hadn't inherited his fortune. Maybe I'd inherited his way of seeing people. 3 weeks later, the acquisition became official. Every business news outlet covered the story. Sterling Global completes $4.8 billion acquisition of Apex Technologies. Analysts predicted sweeping layoffs. Wall Street expected aggressive restructuring. Instead, the first announcement surprised everyone. No layoffs. Research funding restored. Employee education programs expanded. Mental health benefits doubled. Customer support hiring immediately resumed. Financial reporters called the strategy unusually compassionate. Some investors complained. Most employees applauded. On my first visit to Apex headquarters as its new owner, I deliberately arrived without cameras. No media. No photographers. Just Harold and me. Employees gathered nervously in the auditorium. Many looked terrified. Rumors had spread for weeks. New owners usually meant bad news. I walked onto the stage wearing the same charcoal gray suit. Still slightly worn. Still with the mismatched button. Harold had offered to buy me dozens of new suits. I declined. This one reminded me who I had been. The room quieted. Thousands of employees waited. I looked across the audience. Engineers. Receptionists. Custodians. Accountants. Interns. Near the front, Emily sat beside Victor. Neither had expected to see me in person. I adjusted the microphone. My name is Daniel Carter. A few people laughed nervously. Everyone already knew. I know many of you are worried. I would be too. When companies are bought, people usually start wondering whose office will disappear first. Several employees exchanged uneasy smiles. I'd like to begin differently. I stepped away from the podium. My father taught me something. He believed a company exists because people trust one another, not because someone owns more stock. I looked around the room. So today, I have only one promise. If you work honestly, if you respect your colleagues, if you care about the people who trust this company, you never need to fear me. Silence. Then, someone started clapping. One person, then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium stood. The applause rolled through the building like thunder. Not because I was rich, because fear had been replaced with hope. After the meeting ended, people slowly dispersed. Emily remained seated. Long after everyone else had left. Eventually she walked toward me. She wasn't wearing the confident smile I'd once known. She looked exhausted. Can we talk? Harold glanced at me. I nodded. I'll meet you downstairs. He quietly left. The auditorium became silent again. Emily looked around the empty room. I kept replaying yesterday in my head. I still can't believe it. I can. She lowered her eyes. I've been asking myself one question. What question? She took a shaky breath. If I had known, would everything be different? I answered honestly. Yes. She closed her eyes. The answer hurt. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. She whispered, that's what scares me. I waited. She looked back at me. I don't know whether I loved you, or whether I loved the future I thought you couldn't give me. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I said quietly, I've asked myself a different question. She looked up. What? If I'd inherited nothing yesterday, if Harold had never found me, if I had gone back to my little apartment, would you still have left? She couldn't answer. Not because she didn't know, because she did. The silence between us became the answer. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm sorry. For everything. I was ashamed of you. I measured your worth by your paycheck. I forgot who you were. I nodded slowly. I know. You hate me. No. She looked surprised. I don't hate you. I loved you. And that's very different. She began crying openly now. I wish I could undo it. I smiled sadly. So do I. Not because I wanted her back, but because I missed the woman she used to be. The woman who once believed in dreams before she started comparing her life to everyone else's. Emily wiped her tears. Is there any chance? I gently raised a hand. She stopped speaking. I forgave you. Relief briefly crossed her face. Then I quietly finished. But forgiveness isn't the same as going back. Her shoulders sank. She understood. For the first time, there was no billionaire standing between us. No company. No inheritance. Only two ordinary people. One who had learned too late that respect cannot depend on success. And another who had finally learned that the greatest fortune he would ever possess was never the $17 billion his father left behind. It was the self-worth he discovered the moment he stopped asking someone else to define his value. Emily nodded slowly. I understand. She wiped away the last of her tears, forced a fragile smile, and quietly walked toward the auditorium doors. I watched her leave without calling her back. There had been a time when I would have chased after her, begged her to stay, promised to work harder, earn more, become someone she could finally be proud of. But that man had disappeared the moment I realized my worth had never depended on someone else's approval. 6 months later, Sterling Global had changed. Not dramatically, deliberately. Instead of announcing record profits, we announced record employee retention. Instead of celebrating executive bonuses, we celebrated engineers whose inventions saved the company millions. The media didn't quite know what to make of it. One magazine called me the reluctant billionaire. Another preferred the invisible owner. I accepted neither title. I still drove myself to work most mornings. The black sedan remained available, but I rarely used it. Old habits had a way of grounding a person. One rainy Tuesday, Harold entered my office carrying a folder. You may find this interesting. What is it? Resignation. I opened the folder. At the top of the page was a familiar name. Victor Langford. I looked up. He resigned. Harold nodded. He accepted a position overseas. No interview. No negotiation. He simply left. I closed the folder. I hope it works out for him. Harold smiled faintly. I thought you might say something else. Like what? Good. I shook my head. Winning isn't watching other people lose. Harold laughed quietly. Your father used to frustrate his competitors for the exact same reason. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one was handwritten. No law firm. No corporate logo. Just my name. Inside was a single letter. Daniel, I don't expect forgiveness because you've already given me more grace than I deserved. I only wanted you to know that I resigned today. Not because of you. Because every morning I looked in the mirror and remembered the person I became. You once spent years believing in me while I slowly stopped believing in you. That will remain the greatest regret of my life. I hope one day I become someone I can respect again. Thank you for teaching me that dignity cannot be bought. Emily. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully, not to preserve the past, but to acknowledge it. Harold stood quietly near the window. Will you answer? I thought for a long moment, then shook my head. Some letters don't need replies. That autumn, Sterling celebrated its 50th anniversary. Thousands of employees gathered at the company's original factory, the same place my father had built with borrowed money and impossible dreams. The old brick building had been restored instead of demolished. The first production line remained behind glass, not as a museum. As a reminder, I walked through the factory before the ceremony began. Workers stopped to greet me, not with nervousness, with familiarity. One mechanic smiled. Morning, Daniel. Not Mr. Carter, just Daniel. I preferred it that way. An elderly man approached carrying a faded lunchbox. You probably don't remember me. I smiled apologetically. I'm afraid I don't. He chuckled. I knew your father. My attention sharpened immediately. We worked side by side for 18 years. He pointed toward an old steel workbench. Every Friday, he'd eat lunch right there. No private dining room. The old man laughed. He said food tasted better when everyone complained about it together. I couldn't help laughing. That sounds like him. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. My father stood surrounded by welders, electricians, janitors, and apprentices. No one could tell which man owned the company. That, perhaps, had been the point. He would have been proud of you, the old worker said quietly. I looked down at the photograph. I hope so. He would. There aren't many owners who still remember people's names. That evening, I stood alone on the roof of Sterling Tower. The city stretched endlessly beneath the fading sunset. 6 months earlier, I had stood in a tiny apartment wondering how I would survive a divorce. Now I own more wealth than I had ever imagined. And yet, the greatest change wasn't the view. It was the man looking at it. My phone buzzed. A message from Harold. Board meeting moved to Monday. Enjoy your weekend. A second message arrived moments later. From an unknown number. It contained only a photograph. Emily, standing beside a small community center. Children surrounded her, all smiling while holding books. There was no caption, no request, no explanation, only the picture. I smiled softly. Maybe she really was trying to become someone she respected. I hoped she succeeded. Not for me. For herself. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The wind carried the sounds of the city far below. Cars. Laughter. Life. Somewhere in that city, people still believed success was measured by luxury cars, expensive watches, and impossible numbers in bank accounts. I had believed that once too. Or perhaps, I had believed other people believed it. My father had left me $17 billion. But the greatest inheritance he ever gave me wasn't hidden inside a trust. It was hidden inside a lesson. Money reveals character. It never creates it. I turned away from the skyline and walked toward the elevator. Not because there was nothing left behind me, but because the future no longer required me to keep looking back.